Welcome to the More T Vicar podcast from B&A Church in Bristol with James Stevenson and Wayne Massey. At More T Vicar, we talk about culture, theology, and life, hopefully introducing you to how following Jesus can make a difference in culture, theology, and life, and also helping you, if you're already a follower of Jesus, to engage with what's happening in the world around you as, if I'm going to use the phrase, follower of Jesus, follower of Jesus. We've been using, what we generally do is go with a critical incident, quite often in culture and the news, and then talk about how we understand that from the Bible and theology. Today's critical incident is a little bit different. We put a survey out in our church to ask our members about how life has been in lockdown and to get some feedback on some of the things we've been doing. And I was reading through the comments, which have been brilliant, challenging and brilliant. But there was a really interesting one that said, thank you for your resources. It was very positive about More T Vicar. And then it said, so this has been, basically it said, I'm not going to read it out, but it basically said, in a season where it's been really difficult and a lot of us have been quite anxious, the vicars have come across as calm and unflappable. And, and they carried on with the sermon series they were doing. And on lots of levels, that's been great. But on a level, it's felt slightly removed from the anxious life everybody else is living. And as I read it, I thought to myself, oh my word, because basically my emotions have been all over the place for the last 3 or 4 months. Is that how I've come across? And so we thought we would talk about how we have found lockdown and COVID-19 and the changes in church and be a bit honest there. And then also talk a little bit about why it is we appear to be unflappable when you see us on screens or when you listen to podcasts. Is that right, James?
Yeah. Well, that's because we are unflappable. We're like Teflon.
Teflon, nothing gets to us.
Yes, no. So it's always important to listen to people when they have something to say that, as you will often say to me, there's at the very least there's always a kernel of truth in what somebody has to say when it's negative, and sometimes it's more than that. So we're really, as you also say, feedback's the food of champions. So we don't ask surveys so that our egos can be massaged. So I think part of this response is a desire to say, actually, it hasn't been that easy, and we want to correct that understanding.
So I wonder about, so a good starting point to be would be, there's a couple of things I think we need to recognize. So as our kind of in, and then go from there to kind of our heart. So the first one is to recognize that if you and I weren't Christians, whatever jobs we were doing, we would have probably handled them fairly well in COVID-19, because both of us are quite high up the change curve and embrace change and challenge. So actually, we need to be honest about that actually you and I enjoy a challenge and enjoy change and enjoy embracing it. So there are elements of what's been happening the last 4 months that have suited or just how you and I are wired and how we do stuff. And that's kind of, interestingly enough, I think, irrespective of whether we're followers of Jesus. A second thing for us to note, I think, if you don't know anything about B&A, but how we're structured as a church around our little churches, means that actually, compared to a lot of churches, we were able to transition into lockdown structurally. So it might not be what you see on screen, but actually structurally in terms of how we're organized, and was not easy, but was far simpler for us than a lot of other churches. And conversations I've had with a lot of my colleagues. They said, the strength of your small group structure means that you were able to get into this easier. And then the third thing is a conscious decision, I think, on our part. So I'm going to use the Genesis series as an example here, is that actually in a season where everything gets thrown up in the air, we believe that Jesus remains the same. And there is an element of us teaching into that by choosing not to abandon our Genesis series. And go, oh my word, we don't know what to do now, so we're going to stop teaching Genesis. Or and so there's an element in us taking decisions, maybe in terms of how we've presented ourselves as well, to give you, the listener, and today the viewer, I keep trying to remember, I keep looking at you and then trying to look at my camera, the listener and the viewer, a sense of security. Because actually, what you wouldn't have wanted is us appearing on screen every Sunday going, I haven't got a clue what's going on, and I didn't actually think about writing a sermon. I'm just going to stand here now and open the Bible and have a random go at it.
But that was probably what was going on behind our eyes most weeks.
but I just want to share that. So those three things. Number one is we recognise that we'd slightly have enjoyed this anyway. And number two, the strength of how BNA is organised as a church. And number three is actually there is a need in times like this for leadership to be calm. So one of the reasons Scottish independence is back on the agenda is because of the calmness of Nicola Sturgeon. That's not an opinion on Scottish independence, by the way, but it's just actually the calm leaders in this season people are looking to.
Yeah.
And so whether or not you think that's us, there was a decision to try and help you by creating a place of certainty as best as we could. Now, that's not saying that's the sum total of all of our lives. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to ask you to talk about you in a second. But a very dear friend of mine who has led 3 churches into seriously significant growth, and 3 times the Lord has said, "I need you to walk away from this now because there's somebody else to take this on." So, an amazingly godly man. Talked about a building project and about not being able to sleep the night before a building project in the early 1980s. I think it was 150,000 pounds or something, back then. He said, I couldn't sleep. And he said, the thought was I should stand up in the chair in the morning and go, "We need 150,000 pounds. I couldn't sleep a wink last night." And he said, but that wasn't the moment to share that. The moment, the first thing, the moment that what people needed to hear was, this is what God's calling us into, and this is where we're headed for. He said, but then there would be a moment where I needed to say, do you know, I had my doubts and I had my fears. So there's an element of that's what we're doing this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, whenever you're listening, is going, this hasn't been easy for us. James, what's it been like for you?
A good friend Phil Mann talks about how lockdown magnified what was going on before. So it magnified different cracks that were there, but also strengths. And I think for me, I'd say that the challenge of responding to leading in this setting, but also to fairly soon after we went into lockdown, conducting a funeral of a friend, magnified certain strengths that God has by His mercy deposited in my weakness around listening to Him and pastoring and caring for others, and bringing comfort in grief. But I think early on I was overworking, and that's one of my weaknesses. And I struggled with that. I think my family struggled with that. I didn't handle that particularly well, and it took some robust conversations between Nikki and myself to get that balance right. I think of late I've just noticed that I've been quite frayed mentally, and last Sunday I had to invite you into a conversation that was not going to be in any way difficult. It was going to be a really good conversation with some lovely people, but I knew that actually I was not. I was getting to a point where I was unable to hear what people were saying to me as clearly as I thought I was, and it just happened in the kind of the week running up to it, and so you came along and it was fantastic and really, really helpful. But just acknowledging that my brain as a muscle has been overstretched, and so I need to take care of it. And so I'm thinking about how we do that in terms of rest and as we talked about, summer Sabbath. But it has been a really demanding time. Lots of change. It's been demanding emotionally. And there's been people going through real pain, and so things just don't work. My body's not quite working the way I would want it to. I'm not exercising as much as I'd want to, and that's partly just that it's not as much of a priority as it should be. We're just kind of trying to work out how on earth we do this. But at the same time, I've discovered a journey from the Bible being a professional duty to it being a personal joy, and understanding more of who God is. But I think the biggest, if I were to try and put my finger on the biggest issue that came, was when it was similar for you. I think it was when Boris Johnson decided that the Church of England could open up like the rest of the world. And all of a sudden we had to go back to doing everything that we were supposed to do before for everyone who wanted everything before, and carrying on doing everything that was new for everyone who wanted everything that was new, and then reach out to all the people that we haven't even reached. And I couldn't even bring myself to read the different bits of legislation around it, because I think it just would have induced a panic attack. And I found myself just really anxious. And even now, when I think about it, I still am, just dealing with the demands that people would want to put on me, and having to justify myself for the decisions that we're making. And I still don't know how to do that, and it's a real weakness in my life, and it's something that actually I know that I need God's strength in, and I need to learn what it means to be led by Him, and to speak out of that. There we go. There's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, I think so. If I was going to so my answer is what I will do is I kind of brush anything that's difficult under the carpet, because I have two things. Number one is I will kind of name the stuff that's been really good about lockdown. So, I can say, like, we do Takeout Tuesday in our household, and that's been amazing. And, we all chipped in £10 each so that we could get Disney Plus, and we've all watched Hamilton and The Mandalorian, and we've done stuff like that. And there's been a lot of football in the back garden, and, so I can, and then I can look at my life and go, so on one level, it's weird. I could, because I'm not a doctor or an ICU nurse or a teacher or a delivery driver, that actually I will go, my life has actually been quite easy. I've been able to work from home. I've got a nice study. I've now got an Ethernet cable into the back of my machine, so my internet connection is good, and so therefore I should be like, and so therefore when I get tired and anxious, my default is I tell myself, well, I shouldn't really be, because I can list everybody else who's going through an awful lot worse, and therefore. And I read an article that said the average person in the UK, let alone somebody who works in the medical world or runs their own business or is a teacher, has probably burnt about 3 months about a year's worth of adrenaline. And so I kind of find myself kind of getting to August tired, but not physically, just kind of, as you said, mentally, because we've changed so much and done so much. And so therefore I did, like you, when Boris, I think I've very rarely in my life got close to what I would call panic attack, but I almost felt like a panic attack coming on when I read that I could open up my church, because I could list everybody who, whatever decision I took, for whom it would be the wrong one, and then I was, so that made me realize that there was this level of anxiety that was kind of rising up in me, and that was born out of tiredness. I've recognized that, like in this season, that my rhythms have all gone out of the window. And so therefore my kind of prayer life still exists, but has changed. And possibly in some ways, I've picked up some good stuff, which is good, but also lost some stuff. And what was amazing, I'm going to reach out, if you're watching and see here, if you're in my little church, you know about this. In my little church, we've just been spending Wednesday nights waiting on the Lord for one another, and just basically prophesying over one another. And it was my turn last night. And there was a kind of a real challenge to me to step back into gifts and ways and things I didn't use before. And it just made me realize that in this season, the kind of what you might call the kind of soaking prayer, or the charismatic prayer and tongues prayer, I haven't been doing as much of as I would normally, because it feels kind of slightly selfish, just basically, lie on that sofa there and listen to 15 minutes of worship music, but it does my soul the world of good. And that I hadn't been doing that because of busyness. But actually I could tell myself I've been reading my Bible and praying, and realizing that's not been good for me. And then also a dawning realization, this is not, I'm not getting the violins out about Vicars here, but actually, even though we haven't been seeing people physically, we are, like you were talking about funerals, the strange thing about our job is we're the second conversation in everybody's life. So if somebody loses their job, we're the second conversation. if somebody has an illness news, or if somebody dies, or if somebody's, and actually that all of those second conversations do begin to add up. And so just a recognition that, as great as lots of the last few months have been, it has been hard. And then the other thing,
but
as
it's
well,
good.
it's
God is good in that.
Yeah.
And I think part of it, and what I'd want to share with people, is that, having been in counselling for the last 6 years, and seeing somebody 4 times a year, and then dipping into sessions when there's a need, I know that I am wired I hit ceilings of my capacity. So that might be handling trauma in people's lives, and I hit a ceiling of being able to deal with it myself. And then I realized, I should have been talking to God about this. I should have been inviting God into those moments more. And I persuade myself that I am genuinely talking to him about talking about those situations with him, but I'm not really, and not interceding into those situations with him and allowing him to shape how I engage with them. And so, but that's just because I wasn't taught how to do that when I was younger. And so I still have to learn to do that. And it feels at times like this is a bit of a computer game. I get to another level, and I have to learn how to bring God into the greater level of trauma that we're experiencing. And those of us who travel with us through the fostering journey know that that's been happening at home over the last few years as well. And it's almost as if, I have to come to terms with my own stupidity, that I fail to bring those moments before God in prayer. And so I think probably the reason why in those first few months we didn't seem phased was not just our personality, but also that because of the trauma that we have dealt with. We've been the second person on the scene when somebody has died, and lots of others haven't. And so when COVID comes along and there's the threat of death, actually that doesn't phase us in the same way as it phases other people. But actually further down the line, when we've been engaging in multiple scenarios, and more than we had done before COVID-19 came along, we then realized, okay, actually our natural muscle for this is running out, and we spot where we've been relying on ourselves, and we realize where we need to rely on God.
And I think I'd want anybody listening or watching to hear this one thing, is that actually if you're the person who put the unflappable thing, thank you very much, because it's got us thinking. What I want you to hear is that we haven't been hiding anything, and there hasn't been a lack of integrity, because actually for me there are 3 words, well actually 4 words, but 3 things that I would want you all to hear, which is why I've come across the way I have. Number 1 is what I was seriously pleasantly surprised with was in that first few weeks coronavirus, where we all thought it was going to get to us at some point. That's not me being melodramatic. I think we all talking to people in our street, everybody's like, when's it going to get to our street? And what I realized in my soul was this depth of security in who I am in Jesus, and that actually I was all right eternally. And I found myself kind of just gently smiling about, wow, I have this deep security in who I am in Jesus. So that's one of the reasons I come across as unflappable, because that's actually because I'm born again. And I know where I'm headed. The second thing is no matter how hard things have got, sometimes every day, I hear great stories of what's happening in church, and people joining Little Church, visiting Soul Food when I visit Soul Food, what's been happening in Alpha, conversations yesterday about somebody who's become a Christian, how we disciple them. So every single day I'm hearing stuff about what God is up to, and that builds my faith. And then that gives me confidence in what God is doing in the future and what he's doing in and through our church. And so through that, when I am tired, when I am anxious, that's real, but it doesn't stop. It's never overtaken my sense of security for eternity, my sense of excitement about what God is doing, and my confidence in the future of his church, even if I have no idea what it looks like. and going back to Genesis, the reason we stuck with Genesis is because we felt the Lord say, teach Genesis for a year. And actually, the Lord who told us to teach Genesis for a year is the Lord who, in his sovereignty, knew that COVID-19 was coming. And we found ourselves teaching about Joseph, a guy who's basically been forced into some kind of strange second choice world / lockdown, as we were all in there as well. And you just think, God, it's not easy, but God has got this.
So bringing this into land, I'd want to say that we are ordained, we are clergy, we have been set apart for this, but we're still human. We're still treasures in jars of clay. Our bodies are jars of clay, and God has set the treasure of His Holy Spirit in us, just as He has in you. And there are times when you see that treasure of God shining through, and there are other times when you see that the fragile jar of clay, and there are times when you see both, and most of the time it's probably both. But I guess we just want to encourage you to think about what God's saying to you in this, about how you are genuinely bringing all of yourself to Him, that you might know His strength in your weakness, and that you might lead and influence wherever God calls you to lead and influence, so that you and others might follow Jesus with us. Thanks for watching or listening, whichever one you've done. And we hope that you continue to enjoy the More Tea Vicar podcasts.
God bless.